Hello there, gang, and welcome to another episode of Displaying Model Behavior, the Earth's mightiest action figure video podcast. So take off your pants, crack a beer, and let's talk toys. Let's talk about the top 50 Spider-Man villains. If you're building a Spidey display, then you want the worst of the worst, but you need to know which ones are the absolute baddest of the bunch, the essential Spidey villains. Let's not stand on ceremony. Mr. Wayne, let's talk about him. Coming up in the number 50 spot, it is the Dread Dormammu. Dormammu? What? Huh? Who? Magic guy? Spider-Man? Yes. How many times has Spider-Man had to team up with Doctor Strange because of something Dormammu related? It's more than you would think. Spidey and Doctor Strange have had this ongoing relationship for pretty much since the title started back in the 60s. And anytime it's Spidey teaming up with Strange, it's because there is magic on the cards. It's never the other way around. It's never like Spidey goes, "Hey, Doctor Strange, some guys just robbed a bank. Can you help me out?" No, it's always like, "Hey, there's some magic stuff. I have no idea what's going on." And Strange is like, "Don't worry, it's probably Dormammu." And 9 times out of 10, yeah, it's Dormammu.
And now we've got J. Jonah Jameson, who always wants pictures of that menace Spider-Man.
Now I know that JJ is kind of a hero, ally of Spider-Man now. I mean, heck, they were brother-in-laws for a while. That was weird. But originally, back in the day, of course, it was JJ. I mean, look, when you finance a supervillain, not only in the making of the Scorpion, but also in the Spider Slayers, yeah, I think that qualifies you as a villain. So don't worry, Jameson has made up for his misdeeds and kind of made amends for his ways. But back in the past, Jameson was definitely a Spidey villain. Then we got the Black Cat. So these ones at the back of the list are more sort of enemies turned allies, because of course Black Cat is an ally of Spider-Man, but it wasn't always that way. Of course, right back at the very start, she had more of that Catwoman, cat burglar kind of vibe going on. But then even recently, during the whole Superior Spider-Man arc, she broke bad again when she thought that Peter viciously assaulted her. It was actually Dr. Octopus in Peter's body. You know the score. But that was enough to tip her over the edge and make her launch a campaign to become crime boss of New York City. And she's gone back to the side of the Angels now, but man, for a brief time, she was as bad as they come. And much like Felicia Hardy, we've got the Prowler. And this is another fun one. It's a bad guy gone good and now ally of Spider-Man. And also his costume has got a lot more up-to-date and high-tech. But original pajama-wearing Prowler? Yeah, he was your classic breaking and entering bad guy. And it wasn't until a few issues in that he reformed his ways. But before that, he was definitely a villain. Now we got ourselves an absolute fan favorite. Of course it is Frogman. Not the current Frogman in the comics, not Eugene, but his dad. Eugene is trying to make amends for what his dad did, but original Frogman Sr., or Frogman Classic as he might be known, was an absolute bad to the bone villain, definitely deserving of a place on this list.
Now we got a real bright and colourful one with Toxin.
Now this is slightly crossing over into the Venom category, but it's still encompassed within Spider-Man, I like to think, because they've had a bit of a run-in as well. They've crossed paths enough that I would consider Toxin a Spidey character who is very much, at least for a time, villainous depending on who's inside the symbiote. Because there have been a whole bunch of people to wear the Toxin symbiote. At first it was Patrick Mulligan, then Eddie Brock himself. Now it's like a young kid who's definitely more of a very sort of 90s style kid superhero sort of thing. It's a fun dynamic, but for the briefest time, as you can see from this action figure, Toxin was an absolutely terrifying monster. Definitely a villain. Oh, and now it pains me. God, I can't believe I'm doing this. Scarlet Spider is officially a Spider-Man villain. And it's like, dude, how did we get here? How did we stray from the light? Yep, my favorite Spider-Man character, hero, version of Peter Parker. He's pretty much a straight up villain now. Now, I don't think this includes classic proper Ben Reilly, the one who died in Spider-Man number 75. But since they cloned him and resurrected him, that character has definitely been a villain. Tried to be good, and then the writers just step in and scramble up his brains and go, "Nah, you're definitely a bad guy." And now I'm like, you know what? Screw it. He's a bad guy. Let's enjoy the ride. Now we got a slightly obscure one, which is funny to be obscure and modern as well, which is the Poisons. Poisons are a weird little character that were kind of introduced to be symbiotes that latch onto symbiotes. So it's kind of like symbiotes with an extra step. So they're kind of these little crab-looking kind of things that they wait until someone's got a symbiote on them, then they latch onto that. So it was a great excuse to do a big Venom and Spider-Man multi-part crossover. The thing I'll say about the poisons is, when they do attach to someone, it's a really cool design, because we love Venomized versions of characters. So now they have kind of like a crab shell, almost mech armor look to them. So then you get Venomized versions of characters with a crab shell mech type look. It's cool, it's weird, it's bizarre, but we've only got one poison, and this is the one on the list. Another one of Spider-Man's frenemies, it is Silver Sable, Silver Sablinova. This is one of those ones who's really an ally or an enemy of Spider-Man, depending on what her particular agenda is at the time. So she's never had a vicious kind of vendetta against Spider-Man, but she is a mercenary, and she kind of works either for her country or for the highest bidder. And hopefully for Spider-Man, he will land on the same side as she is, because when they do team up, they make a great combination, and Spider-Man has worked with her in the Wild Pack before, but I wouldn't go so far as to call her a 100% ally, because when the circumstances have changed, then she has absolutely been an enemy of Peter Parker. We got a favorite of mine now with the Jackalantern. Now this version from Marvel Legends is a very modern looking Jackalantern. And much like many other legacy characters, there have been many different people wear this guise with many different looks. I would love to see a classic Jackalantern on his flying saucer with all those kinds of different accessories. Hopefully we'll get that at some point. In the meantime though, we've got modern mercenary looking Jack-o'-lantern, and honestly, he looks really cool. I'd love to see an unmasked head, because his face is gruesome. His human face actually looks like a Jack-o'-lantern. He's missing teeth and his eyes are all bugged out, and it's cool. It's pretty gruesome. But in the meantime, we got this one. So hopefully one day we'll get to see more of Jack-o'-lantern. Now someone who is a bad guy, gone good guy, gone bad, gone good. I can't keep track, but he does make for great comic relief, and that is Boomerang, Peter Parker's former roommate. This is a recent arc of Spider-Man which was actually really fun to follow, where Boomerang's not evil. He's not even arguably a bad guy. He's just an opportunistic dick, really. I mean, if you have the ability to rob banks, he's like, well, why wouldn't I? Beats working for a living. But ultimately, he does have a moral compass that is really fun to follow and see the kind of choices that he makes. Sadly, he will usually take the easy way out, which is what he tends to do, which leaves Peter well and truly stitched up. But at least at the moment, he's very much walking that line between good guy and bad guy, and makes him a very fascinating character. Now, it might be quite low down on the list, but this is a big heavy hitter, Doctor Doom. Okay, the reason he's not that high on the list is because he's not a intense Spider-Man villain. I mean, Doctor Doom doesn't really care about Spider-Man. Spider-Man is so beneath Doom's lofty plans, but occasionally they do cross paths, especially like really early in Spider-Man's career. He was so out of his depth, but he still ended up butting heads with Doom, and it made for the most interesting dynamic. And ever since then, I like to think Doom's got a kind of a weird, begrudging sort of respect for Spider-Man, or he just admires how completely outmatched he might be, yet he still stands up for what's right. And Doom might not like that, and respect might be too strong a word, but he definitely features quite prominently in some of Spider-Man's stories. Speed Demon, classic bank-robbing bad guy. I like the villains who don't necessarily have a deep personal grudge or huge lofty ambitions. It's just someone who has superpowers and wants the easiest way out, basically. So that's stealing from banks and robbing people and ripping folks off, and that's what Speed Demon is. He just has the lowest moral compass in the world. Again, makes for a fun villain, and he's crossed paths not just with Spidey, but of course, all the Avengers, pretty much all the Marvel superheroes. Speed Demon's been a problem at some point in time. He's a fun character to watch, and a really pretty action figure. The first Hobgoblin on the list is Phil Urich. I love the tale of a superhero who actually breaks bad because superheroing is too damn tough. It makes Spider-Man look like all that more of a hero, that he never gave in when life beat him down. He never thought, you know what, screw it, I'm just gonna look out for myself. That's exactly what happened to Phil Urich. He was the heroic Green Goblin, but eventually he just got beaten down and beaten up and broken so many times. He's like, you know what? Screw this. I'm going to become a villain. I'm going to become the new Hobgoblin. And he did, and it was a hell of a ride. Hydroman, one of the prettier Marvel Legends, I think. I just love the translucent blue. You can't really pose him much with the arms and whatnot like that, but it's still a fun one, and I love the ridiculous character-y kind of face. Like, he's not a good-looking guy, I'll say that, but he is a good-looking action figure. There was the classic story, of course, where he merged with Sandman to make this crazy muck monster. He's a villain for the Fantastic Four as well, with the Frightful Four. He's a character who's been around for years and definitely deserves recognition on the list.
And now, you little bloody wankers, it's time for the Juggernaut.
Of course, Juggernaut. He's not a regular villain of Spider-Man, but my goodness, if you're ranking some of the all-time greatest Spider-Man stories, absolutely nothing can stop the Juggernaut is right up there. Such a wonderful tale that shows what kind of a hero Spider-Man is, that no matter how outmatched he is, he will keep fighting the good fight, and ultimately he gets a pretty clever way of taking out the Juggernaut. And since then, whenever Juggernaut and Spidey have kind of crossed paths, there has been that begrudging respect on the part of Juggernaut, I like to think. They have had a few more crossovers, but even just on the strength of that one appearance, Jugs definitely goes pretty high. Now someone who again walks that friend-enemy line is the Punisher. And even though they've teamed up multiple times, I think if you were to ask Spider-Man, he would definitely say the Punisher is not a friend of his. Anyone who goes out with a machine gun and blows away a whole bunch of people, Spidey can't really get on board with that. So for every team-up they've had, there's been an equal number of times when Spider-Man has socked him in the jaw and handed him over to the police. Thomas Fireheart, the Puma. This is one who I think needs a little bit more representation in the comics. We haven't had a good Puma story for a long time. I like pronouncing it that way, Puma. That'll always be my Brave Star pronunciation. Speed of the Puma. Now, this is one who, again, started off as a villain, then became a bit of an ally, but he's always someone who's not too focused on doing what's right for Peter Parker. It's just whether or not their sort of moral codes and objectives align. He's a fun character that, yeah, like I said, I think we deserve to see a little more of. Now we got a fun pair of mercenaries coming up. The first one being Black Ant, an evil android version of a hero. Yeah, that's a cliche that I absolutely love. And Black Ant is hilarious because he's so out for himself. It's funny that he should be kind of a soulless android, but he had the brainwaves of, was it Phil O'Grady? I think, who was a kind of manipulative, lying, cheating scumbag, and now he's been resurrected as an android, which is kind of fun. Although I think actually the human sort of redeemed himself, like the moment before his death, whereas the android's like, nah, I'm just gonna be bad. So he's a fun character and a very cool look. And backing up Ant-Man is Taskmaster. Taskmaster has only recently, I feel, become kind of a Spidey villain, because let's face it, he was always an Avengers type character, and he still is, but he's certainly been featured quite a lot recently, mainly in the Hunted storyline. And his partnership with Black Ant is a really, really fun one, because yes, they're mercenaries, they work together, you might at a push call them friends, but they will also screw each other over at the drop of a hat, and that makes them really fun to follow. Now there's a real cult favorite of mine, Doppelganger. Just like Black Ant is an evil version of Ant-Man, we got Doppelganger, an evil, twisted, monstrous version of Spider-Man. That in itself is wicked. So this creature is pretty mindless, doesn't really have an objective or an agenda besides just wreaking havoc. But I love the way that it's kind of cottoned on to Shriek and Carnage as a sort of a pet, basically, and they will sick him on various superheroes. The Union didn't last very long, but come on, a monstrous six-arm version of Spider-Man who shoots razor webbing, that's wicked.
And now we have Morbius. Blah!
Morbius is, yeah, he's another one of those frenemy enemy type characters. Not gonna lie, never a big fan of Morbius. Haven't watched the movie? Even less of a fan now. He's just your typical vampire character, basically. And he was always a reluctant villain. It was always that classic cliche of like, oh, I don't want to hurt people, but I need the blood or the plasma. Yeah, I was kind of sick of him in the cartoon as well. But even though I'm not a massive fan, he is a very prominent Spider-Man character, mostly as a villain, so he does rank quite high. Now we got ourselves Shriek, Doppelganger's kind of mother in a way, and she's such a fun character. It kind of annoys me that she never seems to have got her due after Maximum Carnage. She featured really prominently, then she had a big storyline with her and Carrion, and then after that it was pretty much obscurity. And then they brought her back just to then sacrifice her so they could resurrect the Demo Goblin. And it's like, man, why are you toying with me like that? You're playing with my heart, Marvel. But still, at least we've got a Hasbro Marvel Legend of it, and even though I wasn't a big fan when it first came out, I'll admit, it's kind of starting to grow on me. Now, one of my all-time favorite Marvel Legends, legit, it is the Demo Goblin. This Build-A-Figure, just look at the colors and the sculpting on this guy. So wicked. Literally a demonic, hellish version of the Hobgoblin. So wicked. I'm so glad that they brought the character back, sort of. It has like a female version inhabiting the body of Shriek. Hopefully they split the two off, because I would like to have the two unique characters. But in the meantime, this Marvel Legend, absolutely wicked. Now we got something that I don't like, but I got to acknowledge it, and that is Mephisto. Yep, Mephisto, whether I like it or not, which obviously I don't because I just said that I don't, is a big villain in Spider-Man. He shouldn't be, because he's magic and devils and all that kind of nonsense, but he's been featured so often in so many massive paradigm-shifting Spider-Man storylines that completely change the face of what that character is and what his life looks like that, dang it, I gotta accept that Mephisto is a big-time Spider-Man villain. Now, one that's a favorite of mine is the White Rabbit. I love anything that's kind of a riff on Alice in Wonderland. This is a fun character with also quite a lot of grit behind her as well. Depending on what the writers want to do, she can either be kind of goofy and taken out super easy, or she can be a real kind of psycho menace. You know, she can be pretty scary sometimes. And at the moment, she's being used prominently in the whole gang war sort of storyline going on. So I'm interested to see what's going to happen. And I can only imagine with more appearances like she's having now, this character's stock is going to rise. And now we got the Green Goblin. Why is the Green Goblin so low down on the list? Well, don't worry. This is the Harry Osborn version of the Green Goblin. That's why I'm using the Retro Goblin here, because this was the only costume that Harry ever wore, whereas Norman has worn various different versions and reinterpretations of the Green Goblin costume. So I'm saying Harry because, yes, he was another classic version of a friend turned enemy turned kind of friend and then dead and resurrected, and there's a lot. I'm still not entirely sure what the whole Kindred story was about. I think I get most of it. But the absolute tragic tale of the fall of grace of Harry Osborn is an absolute classic arc in Spider-Man. And when he became the Green Goblin again and tried to do good and then went bad and pretty much lost his mind, yeah, that was terrific. I mean, not for him, but for the readers. Fantastic. Hammerhead, one of the most recent Marvel Legends, and what a great interpretation they did of the Magyar thug. This dude has been, I would dare say, overdue for a long time, and now that we finally got him, I mean, Hasbro, well done. Absolutely nailed it. Fantastic suit body, and that face sculpt, brilliant. They're kind of killing it these days with the face sculpts, and Hammerhead's no exception. Really cool, old school character, brought to life like this. I love this guy. One of the most modern Spider-Man villains now is Morlun, so not a huge amount of history behind him. Only a couple of big-time appearances, but every time he has appeared, it has been a big-time appearance. That's the whole thing. They haven't sort of squandered him too much where he just becomes some random guy to show up, have a plot, and then get beaten. It's like when Morbius or his family show up, it's about to hit the fan. And these are the characters who pretty much kicked off the entire Spider-Verse mania that we've been having for the last few years. But when he first showed up, it was just him, and he, well, killed Peter Parker. So that definitely qualifies you as a good villain. We're starting to get real classic now with the Beetle, Abner Jenkins. It's funny that he's now a good guy in the Thunderbolts, but hasn't really had any interaction with Spider-Man since then. So really, you got to go way back to the 90s to when he used to actually be a card-carrying member of what you would say are Spider-Man's villains. But while he was, from the first time he was introduced, right up to the whole Thunderbolt scheme when he became a part of that, he was a classic Spider-Man, bank-robbing, mercenary, no-good type villain. Although you could argue he was possibly as much an Iron Man villain as he was a Spider-Man. But hey, when I was a kid, I wasn't reading Iron Man, I was reading Spider-Man, and I saw a lot of the Beetle, so he definitely ranks high.
And now we've got the Hobgoblin that most people might be familiar with, and that's the Jason McIndale version.
That's my Mark Hamill from the animated series Hobgoblin voice. Some days I do it better than others. don't think this was a very good day. But this is a figure that recreates the animated colors very well. I don't think it's necessarily a great version of the Hobgoblin in action figure form. Bit too toned down, they kind of cheaped out a little bit, but he certainly is very, very bright, very, very vibrant, and even though it's not entirely accurate to the cartoon, he definitely has that Saturday morning feel to him.
Hard as marble, cold as ice, Tombstone.
Tombstone's wicked, and he's getting his dues once again in the comics, being featured heavily as a big bad mob boss. Not some brainless lackey or random enforcer, but the actual power behind the throne. And the man on the throne. He's the man on the throne and the power behind it. He wears a lot of hats. This is a really underrated Marvel legend, I think. The face sculpt is really, really awesome. So if you don't have Tombstone, honestly, you should add him to the collection. He's a cool figure. This next one maybe shouldn't rank so high, but Lady Beetle is the daughter of Tombstone, so I wanted to put them together. I love this whole character's backstory where her dad was a career criminal, so she thought, yeah, I'm going to be something even worse. I'm going to be a lawyer. But of course, lawyering wasn't evil enough, so she went into being a costumed ne'er-do-well in the form of Lady Beetle, and she's been so much fun to read ever since then. She's got a great Marvel legend that kind of represents her costume beautifully with the great big translucent wings. Gorgeous to have on the shelf, really fun character.
Now we're hitting some of the big guns. First up with the Jackal.
Oh my goodness. This is one who, let's face it, he doesn't appear all that often these days, but he had such a massive impact on the life of Peter Parker. The entire Clone Saga, well, sort of was retconned to have been Norman Osborn's doing, but it wouldn't have been possible if not for Miles Warren, the Jackal. This is one who I'd love to see more of in the comics.
And the final Hobgoblin, Roderick Kingsley. Now, I don't actually know whether he or Macendale have featured the most in the comics because it was all a big mystery at first who it was behind the Goblin mask. And there have been so many retcons and backstory changes that it's a little bit vague, I think. But I love Roderick Kingsley because he is the most mastermind, cerebral type character of the Goblins. Macendale is kind of crazy and a bit sort of panicky, and Phil Urich is similarly caca for cuckoo puffs. But Kingsley, he's the scheming, planning, manipulative kind of badass character, and I think that was when the Hobgoblin was most effective, so I'm a big fan of this version.
And of course now we got Shocker! Great Spider-Man villain. One of those great sort of C-list villains who you can always just have show up just so Spider-Man has somebody to punch. But occasionally, some writers have actually written him to be a really formidable villain. So like anyone, it depends on what kind of story you want to tell and how you want to present the character. But generally, I kind of like Shocker being this poor old schlub who's just trying to make a dishonest buck, and Spider-Man keeps getting in the way.
Fun and games are over though now with Carnage. What do I have to say that you don't know already?
For a modern villain, this guy absolutely staked his claim as one of the most iconic of the Spider-Man villains because he kind of changed the game. Spider-Man always had a lot of light and dark, and it was, a very nuanced kind of thing. But then Carnage showed up and all bets were off. It was like, okay, we're going to get real nasty now and see what Spider-Man does when he fights against someone with no moral code who just wants to hurt, kill, and maim people. That was a real different change for Spider-Man and how he's going to approach what he does, and ultimately, granted, has led to a few too many stories, but the ones that are good, they're really great. A character who we might be seeing a new version of soon, hopefully, is the Scorpion, Matt Gargan. He's had loads of different costumes and versions and variants throughout the years, but this is the most iconic version of him, with the weird green face, which doesn't make the most sense in the world, but that was how he was drawn in the classics. That's what we're getting in the action figure here. And look, I can't really have too much of a problem with a character with a bendy wire tail. More like that, please. Continuing with the heavy hitters, we've got the Chameleon. Now, this is someone who has absolutely plagued Spider-Man's life for so long, and I love that he's actually, as a character, somebody who shows the scars of being a supervillain. He's been locked up with all sorts of psychological issues and problems that have arisen for him just from living this insane life that he has. I love the arc that they had the Chameleon go through in the 90s, where the death of Kraven set him down this dark path trying to destroy Spider-Man's life, and ultimately ended up with him confined in Ravencroft. Really fascinating character. I would love a retro version, so hopefully, I'm doing a lot of finger crossing. Hopefully that's another one we might see soon.
And now it's the Rhino! What a wonderful character. What a great action figure this is. Absolutely big, chunky, monstrous. One of the best kind of foils for Spider-Man is someone who is an exact opposite of him. Whereas Spidey is small, light, quick, smart, and intelligent, Rhino is just a big, powerful wrecking ball. And whenever they fight, it's really dramatic because yes, Rhino is a dumb thug, but he is dangerous. And it's often not just what he's going to do to Spider-Man, but what's going to happen to all of those around them getting caught up in the chaos. Always a big time character, well deserving to be high up. Then there's the Lizard, Curt Connors, someone who is occasionally friends with Spider-Man, depending on what part of his brain is taking over. But let's face it, when you eat your family, that pretty much casts you as a villain. I love that this is a character who can change so much depending on how the writer wants to portray these different parts of him. There's been a fun arc going recently where he's been trapped in his lizard form, but with the Curt Connors mind, so he's civilized, but also an insane, terrifying lizard as well. And then you've got the other stories that can be really terrifying, where it's just the lizard written as an absolutely petrifying monster who's going to rip people apart. Those are the fun ones. And then we enter Electro. Retro Electro in this case. Love this figure and talk about a long-term, long-standing character. This guy's been around right from the very beginning. Always menacing Spider-Man, and he's had his ups and downs. The character has been killed off, resurrected, brought back. There's a female version. All sorts of things happening with him. And he's always interesting because like so many of Spidey's, not best villains, but the ones that make him think outside the box, he's so much more powerful than Spider-Man. So Spidey always has to come up with new ways or means or methods to counteract whatever he's going to do. Brings out the best in Peter Parker, a real standout villain. Adrian Toomes, the Vulture. Now, this is a character who I really wasn't interested in when I first started reading Spider-Man. I was like, why do I care about this old man with wings? It's not a character that's very fascinating at all. And then I read some really good Vulture stories where the writer crafted these great sort of tales that actually play into how cerebral he is and how he is a vulture, not just with the wings, but the type of personality he has. Picking off the weak, manipulating people. Such a cool, scheming character. And hey, he sucked the life out of Peter Parker's robot parents, and there's not many people who can claim that. And then we have Wilson Fisk, the kingpin of crime. Loved this retro figure, loved the Build-A-Figure. But when I had him in hand, I was like, man, I wish we had the purple pants and the more colorful. Oh, there it is. Thanks, Hasbro. So this is absolutely wonderful. The king of all gangsters, basically. He will sort of rotate with different characters depending on what's happening with him. If he's in prison or the mayor or doing something else, occasionally being dead. But when Wilson Fisk is at his best, he is the kingpin of crime and being an absolute menace to Spider-Man. And probably mostly Daredevil. But Spider-Man too. Now we got Mysterio. I have got so confused over the years as to how many times he has died, been replaced, different versions, but let's just say Quentin Beck, because that is Mysterio. And I mean, this version, this retro Marvel Legend that we have, so bright, so colorful, so pretty, absolutely does the character all the justice in the world. Love this costume, love the different sort of stories that can be done with the Master of Illusion. Absolutely fantastic Spidey villain. All of the characters in this top 10 are so iconic that you can really sort of swap their places, but I'm going to put the Sandman high up there because let's face it, Sand is rough, coarse, irritating, and gets everywhere. But if you want to talk complex, interesting characters, the Sandman has been a villain, a hero, he's been turned back to a villain, then he's been conflicted about family and his place in the world, and some Sandman stories have been full-on existential mind trips, breaking down the notion of what is consciousness, and it's crazy what you can do with a character like the Sandman, who exists sort of in everything and nothing. I mean, where is the Sandman's consciousness? That's genuinely been asked by some writers, and that makes for a character who you can really have some amazing stories with. Kraven the Hunter, the man who put Spider-Man in the ground. So many really fascinating character-driven stories with this guy. I need to go back and read more of the classics because my knowledge of Kraven pretty much starts with Kraven's Last Hunt and everything after that, especially with his sons and his family, his resurrection. The final Kraven story, Hunted, was a brilliant second closure to the character, and now we have the legacy Kraven as well. There's always going to be a Kraven around to menace Spider-Man, and quite frankly, I'm happy with that. Top 3 now, the first one being Venom. Okay, he may be a good guy now, but my goodness, when he was bad, he was arguably the meanest, scariest villain Spider-Man has ever faced. A character who has all of his strengths and he knows who Peter Parker is. And that is just so scary, so awesome, and he was an absolute menace. So even though I enjoy reading the heroic symbiote god Eddie Brock character now, it was back in the early 90s when Venom was absolutely at his peak, and it's those past stories that keep him so high on the list. And the penultimate greatest Spider-Man villain of all time has to be Dr. Octopus. This is a guy who, right from the very start of Spider-Man, has just been that go-to villain for the character. Such a perfect, wonderful foil. Even just the way that his tentacles and his gimmick sort of works. What a great counterpart to Spider-Man swinging around, the sort of visual fights that they can have. Absolutely brilliant. And the fact that it's two scientists butting heads, and they have had some of the absolute most captivating stories, especially recently with the Superior Spider-Man arc, where he literally takes over the body of Spider-Man and just becomes, arguably, the Superior Spider-Man. But not by the end of it. Well, that's a story for another time. Still, absolutely adore Doc Ock. I'm glad that he's back prominent. I miss the Superior Spider-Man, I really do. But I'm so glad to have classic Doc Ock back in the comics. Can't wait to see where they go with the character next. And the number one Spider-Man villain of all time, of course, has to be Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, the ultimate evil in Spider-Man's world. All the other villains clash with Spider-Man for different reasons, whether it's a personal vendetta, or they're just career criminals, or it's something in the middle, whereas Norman has all of these to the most maximum degree. It's not just business, it's family. It's so intense. The hatred and the rivalry. Yeah, it's not even a rivalry. It is just a straight up hatred between these characters, and rightly so. Peter's always tried to do the right thing, and Norman will always do whatever he can to twist the knife if it means that he can hurt Peter Parker or the people that he loves. So yeah, Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, absolutely the number one Spider-Man villain. And folks, that does it for this list of the top 50 Spider-Man villains in Marvel Legends. Now, of course, there are so many other Spidey villains that could have populated this list if only Hasbro had made the figures yet. So guys, let me know what characters we still don't have in Marvel Legends form that you would like to see populate an incredible Spider-Man villain shelf, because Lord knows, I've got a few in mind. So guys, thanks very much for watching. If you like what you see here and you want to see more, then join the 6-1 clicks by clicking the like, share, and subscribe buttons. And if you want to go one step beyond in supporting the channel, well, there's a few ways you can do that. First of all, if you want to look like a man about town, you can pick up one of these badass displaying model behavior t-shirts over at teespring.com. Check the link in the description below. Or if you want to, you can go over to patreon.com/displaying model behavior. Toss a couple of bucks my way and you can watch all the exclusive videos on there. Or if you want to stay right here on YouTube, you can grab yourself a YouTube channel membership. You can watch those exclusive videos and you can get the little priority icons in the comments section and when we're doing the live streams and all that fun stuff. And just know that you're giving back to the channel and keeping me in Marvel Legends. And hey, what more reason do you need? So guys, thanks very much for watching, and until next time, keep displaying model behavior.
Coffee, big time